This conference will now be recorded.
2021 to order. And I see we have a couple of citizens watching. Do either of Lori or Letha, do either of you have anything that you would like to say? Would you like to address the committee? If not, just say no.
I don't have any. This is Letha. I don't have anything.
Thank you, Letha.
No, I don't have anything. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. In that case, let's move on to our discussion items and see if we, city council liaisons, do you all have any comments as to either substantive or procedural as to how we go forward? I'll open the floor to either of you or both of you. Arch. You're on mute. You're.
Right. Mr. Durbin, you have a very ambitious slate of items to discuss. I counted 42 items, and from my perspective, it looks like you have basically about 16 weeks in which to cover all the different things that you you've created this list from. So I hope that at some point, either you or Mr. Robbins or the two of you can come to council and give us a progress report somewhere about midway through the process. And then I think a final report will be necessary at the very end before the city submits the end results of your work to the voters of Lago Vista. So good luck and Godspeed.
I'm sure, and a lot of things on there, as you'll see as we go through them tonight, are pretty minor. You know, like clean up a poorly written paragraph or add a word or two here and there. That it's not as ambitious as it looks. But I agree. We've got, and this isn't just from me. This is I've incorporated Mr. Robbins' input as well as Mr. Hunt's input, and I got a big pile of input from Mr. Roberts at about an hour ago, so it's not in there yet. But I looked through, and some of his stuff is duplicative of some of the things that are already in there, and so I'm not sure how much it'll expand it any further. But this is kind of our starting point. And even though it's primarily substantive, even some of the typos and corrections have made the list as they're substantive to themselves. Yes, Ms. Marion, do you have anything you'd like to add? And Arch, I think we'd be happy to report to council, both midterm and with a final report. In fact, I would expect we'd probably give a final presentation to pitch it.
Thank you, Durbin. I don't really have anything additional to add. I think the idea of presenting to council is a good one. I think the only other thing that I might make sure of is that any suggested edits from staff or council, if you have to list those separately on the agenda for future meetings, just to make sure that those are on there. If you don't have to, then no need to do that, but just making sure that those are accounted for somewhere.
I suspect we will eventually present a redlined and strikeout version of a new of a charter that we would propose, and there would be accompanying supportive documentation that goes with that. Okay. All right. If that's if that covers that, then just a couple of I'll start the discussion off by saying that I got good input from you guys, from Frank and Gage and Paul, and like I said, I'd like to incorporate it in on a paragraph, kind of by paragraph basis, like I've done here. At least the substantive stuff. The other stuff, I'm going to maintain a red line version of, for those of you, Mr. Hunt and Mr. Roberts, thank you, that have provided me with some of the grammatical changes and non-substantive cleanup things. Then I'm going to maintain a red line version of all of those. And what I'd like to do is, as we move on, present about a third of those changes each meeting. And then we will be able to go back and look at them again at any time. But as far as the discussion of the non-substantive changes and grammatical errors in sections 1 through 5, there are, I'd say let's go through the document now and see if we can address them, and we'll take it from there. Let me get mine up here. Let's see. Okay, and I have I've sort of, if we want to just kind of go through the charter, if you all have a copy of the charter. Oh, Frank, yes, sir, go ahead.
Are the non-substantive or grammatical changes on the list that you sent us?
Some of them, not all of them. If what looks to be a grammatical error or a grammatical change or in anything, then if it had any substantive effect, I tried to put it on this list. And yes, Frank.
Thanks. I would just request that as we build a list, that we include all the changes, whether they be grammatical or non-substantive or not. So, because I guess it's possible that a non-substantive change in one folks' eyes might be a substantive change in others. So I just would ask that we would get them all.
Yeah, well, we will get them all in the form of a red line, version at some point. But if you want to go through them all, then we can do that too. That's fine. Okay.
Well, when you say red line version, you're going to do it track change?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. So anything added will be underlined. Anything struck out will be struck out.
That's what Paul used, I think, right, Paul?
Yes, that's right, Mr. Robbins. I just went through and highlighted everything that I thought deserved the committee's attention and consideration.
Yeah, it's Mr. Hunt did the same on the document he sent to me. And what I will do, since both Mr. Hunt's and Mr. Roberts picked some of the same ones, as did I thought we would clarify those and kind of get one that basically says, okay, all three of us caught this one. I'll make a comment out to the side. You know, one of us caught this, one of us didn't. That, and kind of go along in that form. Okay. But that's fine. We can go through it and discuss substantive and
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Does anybody not know how to use the tracking feature in Microsoft Word and how to reply to, for example, my comments or Gage's comments or anybody else?
I can tell you, Mr. Hunt knows how to do it, because I've looked at his and
Okay, good.
I've looked at yours, Paul, and there was some question as to whether some of them were trackable, because I could comment on Mr. Gage's or Mr. Hunt's comments, but I could not comment on your comments within your document. So, but just making notes to myself. Okay. In that case, we'll just start going down this suggested areas of change then, and see if we are in somewhat alignment on these. Or some of these now are on here. They aren't really suggestions for change. They are just areas that we may or may not want to address. For instance, this first one, which there's a lot of verbiage in this document, and there are no defined terms within it anywhere. Do we want to have a section at the front, a preamble, if you will, or at the beginning of section 1.1 that says definitions, and have a long list of the terms, some of the terms in here with accompanying definitions?
What's normal?
If you have terms that ought to be defined, they ought to be defined somewhere, and they're not. Sometimes you'll see them embedded within the document that'll say, material breach means blah, 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 blah. Just kind of stuck in the middle of the paragraph after they use the term material breach. But in most documents of this size and this nature, Aaron, you can weigh in here if you'd like. There's usually a section at the beginning that defines any terms we think should be defined within here, because there are terms of art that are used, and we will we'll get to those. I mean, I'll be able to point some out as we go through, because Mr. Hunt pointed several out as well. But I honestly, it would add a lot, and it's going to be a lot of work. But I think that essentially should be a new either a preamble or a new section within Article 1. Any other comments? Any ideas, Frank? What's your ideas?
Well, I got two. One, if we're going to debate these tonight, we're clearly not going to get through them all unless you're going to be here at about midnight.
Yeah, I know.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's a couple, and however you want to play it, I'm okay. One way of doing this is just to go through them, and again, however you want to play it's okay. One way is just to go through it and make sure we all understand what they mean. I have a bunch of these that, for instance, I don't know one. I just got it. I started work on this today at 2.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about a bunch of them. Now, I could, and others could probably react to what we think we know so far. And it would be okay to have a discussion tonight, and people can react or may have studied it, et cetera, and we'll see how far we get. So that's A. B, I don't think I've ever seen a charter with defined terms.
Okay. All right.
If we could start with, the preamble and maybe just poll, does anybody want to see changes with the preamble? Yes, no, what are the changes? If none, let's move on to the next section. It's my suggestion.
Well, I'd like to go through these with the list that I sent out today. And
okay,
like I said, they're not all mine. Let's make sure we understand them. Okay. I think everybody is clear on what a list of defined terms are. Fair enough? Is that a fair statement? Okay, we can move on to the next one. And that is in Article 1, which I think, Mr. Hunt, was your suggestion. I believe you probably got it from looking at other charters where they stated what the official name of the city was. Is that?
That's correct. It was in looking at other charters. I can't remember offhand which ones included it and which ones didn't. But I didn't know if that was covered through any other official document of the city that we could rely on, or whether we should embed it in the charter. So it was more a question than it was a suggestion.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Aaron, do you have any thoughts on that?
So the official name of the city can be in the charter. That's not an unusual thing. A lot of cities don't begin in the same form that they end up as when they incorporate it as a home rule, when they develop their actual charter. A lot of cities start out as either a type B or type A city, and then so it's not an unusual thing to add that. I'll say that most charters do not have defined terms. I'm trying to think of I've looked at probably 5 or 6. Well, I've looked at more than that I don't know that I've ever remember seeing one in any of the charters for any of the cities that I've ever worked with. It could be there. It's not an unusual thing to have a set of defined terms. For example, in a contract, you almost always have defined terms. In other agreements and other types of documents, legal documents, you definitely want defined terms. There are definitely some terms of art. I will say, Mr. Chairman, I don't have the document you're referring to, so I have no idea what y'all are talking about. So I'm kind of here in the dark bit. But if you want me to speak off the cuff, I'm happy to do that. I do not have what y'all have in front of you, though.
All right.
I can forward it to her real quick.
Okay. But in any case, if we don't define them up front, there are some terms in here that probably should be defined, because any citizen that reads this ought to be able to understand it. So if we don't define them up front, we're going to define them inside of it. Okay. Mr. Hunt, I believe you also asked, should there be any reference to a comprehensive plan in the charter? And again, we can discuss this briefly. I don't intend to debate anything tonight. I just like to get these out here so that people can understand them.
I'll tell you what the origin of that suggestion was, is that a former community that I lived in North Texas, Flower Mound, had a smart growth master plan that was put into effect, and any changes to that plan were were required a supermajority vote in council. So that was the basis of it. Are we at a point that we've got, is our comprehensive plan carved in stone to the point that we want to put some kind of special voting requirements on it?
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, and Aaron, you're probably more aware of this than I am, or Paul Roberts is probably keenly aware of this. I believe there currently is a supermajority requirement for any zoning ordinance that is contradictory to the master plan, but that is not a charter requirement. It's written into an ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Aaron?
That's correct.
Paul?
Yes, I would, like Aaron concurred. Yeah, it's in chapter 14, section 13, subsections 2D and E, items 1, 2, and 3 stipulate what findings of fact have to be made if you're going to deviate from the city's comprehensive plan's future land use map. There's 3 findings of fact that have to be made. And the purpose of that is to ensure that you have certainty for people wanting to buy property, and so that you don't have what the courts have deemed to be spot zoning, which is something you can't do. The only problem with that is that a lot of savvy cities have learned that you can cite baloney findings of fact and kind of make it more difficult for somebody to challenge that ruling. So anything that makes it difficult to deviate from the city's comprehensive plan, setting a high burden, helps to ensure certainty and the rights of the citizens. So the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
But if that's established in ordinance, can it be changed? Can the requirement for a supermajority be changed by a simple majority vote?
To change the ordinance?
They changed the ordinance, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So basically, the consideration we have here is, do we want to etch that supermajority in stone?
No.
I think this is what you're saying, right, Gage?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I think we all get that. Let's
I
go
can
ahead.
support that.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next one to make sure that.
Well, let me make sure that's what the suggestion is, because that's not what's written. The issue, the Jage's request, it has to do with supermajority or zoning change, not consistent with the comp plan. Is that what we're thinking about putting in the charter?
Well, I'm not thinking about anything right now. This was a suggestion for discussion, I believe.
Well, I'm right. I'm trying to understand what the suggestion is.
Yeah, Frank, the requirement that I'm wondering about would be whether we would make it a supermajority requirement in the charter to change the comp plan.
To change the comp plan.
Correct.
Okay, that's.
So
I understand that.
So if to better contextualize that for my understanding, if the city wants to change a part of the comprehensive plan, like the future land use map, we enumerate that in the charter such that that change would necessitate a supermajority vote, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Wait. Okay. All right. The next one on here is section 1.04, annexation and disannexation. And Frank, I believe you posted this one. I'm not sure you suggested anything. It just seemed like kind of a topic of conversation.
It's a question for Aaron. This is something my deep foggy that came up during Nature's Point, in which I thought you had to be contiguous before you could annex, but I seem to recall, and you tell me, if we found a way to annex and you didn't have to be contiguous. You're muted.
You're muted, Aaron.
Sorry. For Nature's Point, we are contiguous. We were contiguous, but there is also another way to do it, where if the city owns the property, and that property doesn't have to be contiguous. So that is a way that many cities kind of do a leapfrog growth pattern, meaning that they will go out, buy a piece of property that they foresee is going to be beneficial to the city in the future. It doesn't touch any other city property. It then creates kind of a new nucleus upon which other properties that are adjacent to that can then annex. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that annexation is very different these days. Annexation is not, there's no more forced annexation. So you really have to have the property owner, unless you want to go to the voters. And then you have to have, I believe it may be 50%. I've forgotten there's a percentage of people that have to vote for it. There's a long process. The reality is, it's unlikely that the city's going to annex any property or consider annexing any property unless the property owner itself asks to be annexed. And if in that particular circumstance, they would need to be adjacent. Now, if we own it under the statute, so that may be one thing you want to look at. If our charter says you have to be annex property adjacent to, fix the boundaries, we may want to make sure that that particular section is consistent with local government code, because local government code has changed over time. So that'd be my recommendation, is that we looked for that consistency.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say, I know the annexation laws changed dramatically just a couple, was it 2 years, year and a half ago?
Yep.
And it's much more restrictive in terms of cities going and doing grabs, if you will.
that's right.
And you I think pretty much from all practical purposes, you need the owners got to be on board with it. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. Okay. So Aaron, are you saying that we need to double check what we currently have to make sure it's still compliant with state law, or do you believe it's compliant?
I think we may need to recommend that this language be adjusted so that we could annex any property that we own. Because we have, this is just giving us the power to annex and disannex, fix the boundaries.
Yeah,
I don't think we have to change the language with regard to our authority under the local government code that restricts our ability, but
right.
I don't want to have this language. I would hate to see this language in the charter stay restrictive, in that somebody could argue that we couldn't annex our own property even if it wasn't adjacent, because we have that legal right to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, and then of course there's any sort of limitations we would want to put on that. I mean, we don't want the city to go out and buy a chunk of property in Llano County and try to annex it just because they thought it was a good idea. So, there may be some mileage limitations or something like that we want to think of. But first we need to double check and make sure that what we currently have is compliant, and then we know what we can do to it, and go from there. So Frank, you brought this up. Are you in favor of it requiring to be the property to be required to be adjacent to the city?
No. I think the city ought to have every opportunity to annex. That's A. But it's going to be in accordance with the state law. The way it's written, I felt it was constraining, but I didn't know. And Aaron, I think, has said there are some ways to annex if it's not contiguous. And it's a legal question. And I would propose that the charter not constrain us any further than necessary.
Okay.
And it's a legal issue that I think Aaron said she's going to take a look at.
Okay.
On this topic, the preceding paragraph, section 1.03, I noted in my notes to everyone that though this is a standard provision, like we're talking about, it might be worth addressing this particular paragraph to give us some of that leeway we're talking about.
I think it does, because it talks about subsequent annexations and disannexations, but according to whatever Aaron first of all, does the city own any property that's not in the city limits at this point in time?
I'm not aware that we do.
Okay. Then, but we could always, I think it may need that's something we would need to add to it. But just because the city owns it doesn't necessarily make it within the city limits either. So I think it's still got to be subsequently annexed. I think that 103 is actually pretty clear, considering it's dealing with a pretty complicated subject. Okay. Section 201. Yeah, this one was. I just have that it's poorly written and doesn't make sense and shouldn't be rewritten. I actually don't even remember whose suggestion that was. It might have been mine, but I am actually I think I meant, yeah. Oh, 2.2. Yes, that, Mr. Hunt, that was your suggestion as well as mine. Is that it said, is the second sentence that I think was so offensive. The city shall
Right.
have powers incident to local self-government, both direct and implied, that it would be possible to individually and specifically list in this charter. But it,
I
to
think
me,
they
that
mean
made no sense.
impossible.
Impossible, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you know, exceedingly difficult or unreasonable to list in the charter will probably work there. But that's, I think we're, Mr. Hunt, you and I were on the same page on that one. Everybody else see it and understand it? Any questions?
Well, the thought is to change, is to rewrite it, or is to change would be impossible.
Well, it's not impossible. You could do it. So I think the change would probably to remove possible and put
Impractical?
impractical or and unreasonable to individually specifically list, something like that. Like I said, I don't really feel like we need to debate everything and come to answers on all this stuff tonight. I just like to get them out there at this point. Okay. 2.03, eminent domain. Paragraph 2. And I don't know that we want to do it or not want to do it. I've had it. This came in from a request in speaking with some citizens. In the second paragraph, says the city shall not, however, use the power of eminent domain to acquire land that is owned by a property owners association and that is dedicated and used as parkland for use as a city park. Okay, at the moment, none of the property owners association land is dedicated as parkland for use as a city park. Is it intentional that the city wants to keep this hammer over the head of the POA in terms of taking their parks, or do you want to start fostering a little better relationship with the POA? Or that was the question that came to me, and I just wanted to throw it out there. I told him I would pass it on to the committee as a whole, and so that's what I'm doing. Everybody get it?
No.
Mr. Hunt.
Yeah, I only deal from my personal experience on this. We moved down just before all the brouhaha broke a few years back when the subject was broached, and you know, I don't know that we want to get into making an adjustment to the way the charter is written on this particular item until we know that there's been an awful lot of dialogue with the POA and with the public on where they sit on this.
I'm pretty sure the POA is not pleased with this paragraph.
I think it's the other way
Yeah,
around.
right.
Right.
Yeah, the POA wants this language like it is.
This language was added to keep the city. There was concern a few years ago that the city was going to try and exercise a eminent domain and get the city access, get the citizens of Lago Vista who are non-POA members access to the POA's parks, and this is in there to address that concern. So as written, it seems appropriate.
Well, as written, it allows the city to do it.
Do what?
I don't think it does.
It does. The city shall not use the eminent domain to acquire land that is owned by a property owners association and that is dedicated and used as parkland for use as a city park.
See, I'm reading that to mean that the city cannot annex it for use as a city park.
I'm reading it to say that it needs to be, for the city not to annex it, it needs to be both property owners association and dedicated and used as parkland. And it may just be a punctuation error here. And that is dedicated and used as parkland for use as a city park. Because this requires both that it's owned by the property owners association and that it's dedicated as parkland. And I'm assuming that parkland that for use as a city park is speaking of how it's used now, not how the city intends to use it.
Frank,
shaking his head, but
give us some background on this.
Well, in any case, if that's what if that was the intent, it should be clearer than this. Yes, Frank.
We went through this the last go around, and the committee decided not to change the language for the reasons Mr. Hunt has stated.
Well, okay.
That's just FYI.
I understand. How do you?
That mean we can't clarify it.
Huh?
That mean we can't clarify it. You read it one way, I read it. I think H and I read it another way. Clarifying may be a good thing, but substantively, the cities, we would not recommend, and the last committee did not recommend that we have the ability to use eminent domain on POA parks. Rob, I know the guy that I think talked to you about this, and he and I've had long conversations. Substantively, Rob, this is just you and me. You probably talked to him. He makes good points. Gage's point, I think, is salient.
Well,
the Lago Vista Property Owners Association.
If that's what this says, Frank, if that's what this says, I don't think it should be changed either. But I don't think that's what this says, just from a reading of this of the English language. This is an English language problem. I think we're trying to do the same thing.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'm totally on board with you, Frank. If what we're talking about is clarifying it to submit the fact that it means the city can't annex the POA parks, I'm good with any kind of change like that.
That's what I'm trying to do too. And that's what
I think part of that is also with and without commas, correct?
I think there's a punctuation problem in this, or somebody barfed up a bunch of commas they didn't need to.
Right. I think the commas need to be taken out because it separates the criteria.
Yes, I think there's probably just a clearer way to say what we're all trying to do.
So we can come back to this and visit this one.
Yeah, we'll come back and visit this one. But at the moment, I think we're all on the same page.
Agreed. Carter, what do you think?
He's muted.
Carter, what can you hear us?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, I highlighted it on my document as something that we were going to talk about, but I don't know that I can give any opinion that the others might be able to. I mean, I would be able to understand what maybe the other folks are talking about, but I don't have any specific opinion there.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I think we can clarify that. If you like, I'll try to take a stab at writing some clarifying language for that and bring it back next time. Okay. In 206, under streets and property, there were several changes in this, and most of these were from yours, Mr. Hunt. You wanted in the second paragraph, where'd it go?
Second sentence, I believe.
Second sentence. You wanted it to change it to say, with respect to all such facilities and public property, the city shall have the power to acquire, establish, maintain, alter, abandon, or vacate the same.
So just add the word acquire.
Yeah, you just added the word acquire. I'm not sure what, I'm trying to go back and figure out what the same is, because I assume that's acquire property to put public streets, sidewalks, alleys, highways, public squares, etc., stuff like that on. So, which it probably has under the eminent domain stuff and anything else, but plugging it in here, I don't really have a problem with it.
You know, on 2.03, I didn't mark this up in the Word doc that I shared with all of you, but I think this is a question for Aaron. Aaron, what about, and the reason this comes to my mind is because it's for example, the residential street that I live on is considered a private street. The city does not maintain it. How does something like that change with other private streets? Is that something, how does that work? And is there any relevance to this section in this part of our conversation?
So the city has exclusive control and dominion over all of the public streets. We don't have exclusive control except for exclusive control over private streets. There are a few private streets within the city limits. Those streets are supposed to have a maintenance agreement associated with them, such that the city has confirmation that they will be maintained. They are still required to comply under our subdivision regs with our street requirements. So meaning they have to still meet the same specs, the width, the construction methodologies, that. The rest of the streets, all of the streets, there are design criteria, those types of things. That's all in regulation. This is really meant to focus on what we have exclusive control over with regard to city property. Now, if a private street, if the developer wants to dedicate and deed over a private street to us, that's something the city can consider. It doesn't mean it's an automatic, because sometimes there are streets that are in such bad condition that the city may not be interested in taking over.
I don't know why it would be in the city's interest to want to initiate any type of eminent domain over a private street, but if that was so desired by the city, is this 2.03 where that language would be relevant?
Eminent domain is typically used when the city needs to put in infrastructure, water, wastewater lines, other types of city infrastructure, and the property owner won't engage in selling that property or dedicating the property to the city. And so the city has the right to take it. Now, it doesn't mean they get it for free. They have to pay fair market value. There's a process involved with that, but it allows the city to take the property for a public purpose, but it has to be for a public purpose. That's one of the limitations of eminent domain.
Okay.
I think Gage's comment on putting acquire in 2.06 is essentially, well, the city's got power and has probably and always done it, but this gives them the authority to, at least stated, that they've got the power authority to engage in negotiations to acquire a street, prior to an eminent domain proceeding.
I mistakenly referenced 2.03 a moment ago. I meant 2.06, by the way.
Gotcha.
It's also in 2.01 covered generally there, but this would give it a little more specificity. So it's fine to add that.
Yeah.
A good add.
Okay. All right. Let's see, I gotta move this to read it. Frank, yeah, go ahead.
Paul, the private streets are going to be addressed in the PD zoning ordinance, and I think that's the case in your street. The PDs with private streets have varying degrees of explicivity. The other place you have to look to see what the deal is with the street is to actually, you probably have to look at the plat for that property too, because there are often notes on the plat about that.
In those PDDs, there's also supposed to be a segregation of funds and HOA dues. The state requires well, you have an HOA fee. You also have another fee that goes into a trust fund for the maintenance of the street. But what I've seen happen, for example, my HOA, and it may be happening in others, is a dereliction by the HOA board in maintaining those streets. And when that is the case, it might be in the city's interest to, do something so that it doesn't hurt the overall image of the city and stuff. But I digress, and I think we can move on.
Okay. And 2.0, further down in 2.06, Mr. Hunt, I think you highlighted public ways.
Yeah, I was just asking a question if the term public ways was inclusive of easements.
I don't think so in the way you're thinking here, because that sentence is referring to public seats, streets, sidewalks, alleyways, and an easement, might be some place where they would put a sidewalk or street or something like that, but not necessarily. An easement is not correlative with the rest of those, I don't believe.
I'm okay with that then.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we have that somewhere in the document, we have the power over easements that we need to perform necessary city work. That's all.
Easements are done by contract, by agreement.
Yep.
And so the powers that we have are through that particular easement,
Okay.
whatever that easement language is. So it would never really appear in the context of a street. Now, we might be able to use eminent domain to get an easement if we need it, but
as long as we're covered, that's all I wanted to make sure of.
Okay. Well, now we're going to move on down to a juicy one. City Council. Slane and Arch, you guys can plug your ears if you want. But anyway, we got suggestions going both ways on this one. We've got suggestions to extend to make the terms 3 years, and we got suggestions for term limits. And I guess they're not one or the other, but both of those are out there.
So
And I assume everybody understands them. We don't need to debate them or decide on them tonight. I just want to make sure that we're clear, that everybody understands this list as best we can. So that one doesn't take a lot of take a lot of rereading.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
You're probably aware of this, but if you extend if the council and the voters choose to extend the term of our elected officials to more than 2 years, there are some Texas Constitution impacts. And so some caveat or kind of note about that is recommended when you provide your information to council, so that everyone is aware, if you choose to go this direction, this is one of the things that will be impacted by that.
I'd like to hear more about that at the appropriate time, Aaron.
We will. Yep. Okay.
On 3.01, I do agree. On the discussion is appropriate on the extension of the term limit, changing the term from 2 to 3 years, and the term limits is an appropriate discussion. I will point out 2 things. Other than a typo, it says Mayor Pro Term, T-E-R-M, several times throughout the document. Should be Mayor Pro Tem. But you know, I noted in my document that I sent out to everyone on this that this clearly says that the council shall elect from themselves their Mayor Pro Tem. But I recall the mayor, the last 2 cycles, appointing the Mayor Pro Tem. Am I mistaken on my memory?
I think if I recall right, this last time, and Art, you're probably more familiar than I am, but if I recall, he stated, generally we have the longest sitting guy who hasn't done it, do it. And then there was, I thought he nominated Arch through that process, and I thought there was a vote on it, but I don't recall.
So that clarifies. Yeah. We're following the rules correctly. I've got it now. Thank you.
Yeah. Arch, did you want to clarify that more? Couldn't tell if your hand is up or you're resting your elbow.
Yeah. No, well, actually, I was going to clarify and say that I was nominated and then a vote was taken.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And I made a mention on 3.02, and the residency requirements is already in effect for committee members, I believe, but it is not for the municipal judge. I just happen to think that if you have to be a resident to be on the library advisory board or one of the other committees, you probably ought to be a resident to be the judge as well. That I've also made note of down in where we talk about the judge. So just be aware, but I think it's already a requirement to be a committee member.
Except for one of the committees.
Which committee?
Airport Advisory.
So we can talk about that.
Draw a point for the charter.
Pardon me, Frank, what'd you say?
Well, I'm just saying I understand draw a point for the charter.
Yeah.
The requirements for the committees are ordinance form.
Right. But they're also in the charter, I believe, a little further down, aren't they? At least for, well, the only committees mentioned in the charter are the P&Z and the BOA. But if they're ordinance born, do we want to require that everybody be a resident to be on a committee? I think that's a reasonable request, actually.
I don't know.
Okay.
I can see is now the time to discuss this?
Let's throw a few points out. We're not going, let's not
I would
debate
say
it, let's
that
discuss it.
the antagonist would argue that, well, do you also need to be a resident to practice law in Lago Vista or be a city manager in Lago Vista? And the reasonable response to that is no. We don't, I wouldn't want to see us limit our pool of candidates for judge out of a town of, an area that's 12,000 people personally. But I also see the advantage of having a judge who I think in the perfect world, we could have a resident citizen judge who knows everything going on in our city. I see the advantages of it, but when we're a town the size as we are, I can see the antagonist's argument against that.
Well, you had a perfect world then and it didn't happen. Do you want it to happen again?
I don't have a position. I'm just stating what I think the antagonist would say. Before we go on to number 9 on your list, Rob, on to 3.05, I'd like to speak to 3.03, which I think is something, it's kind of a minor point. It's in the document I sent everyone, but any council member involved in, it reads, the council shall be the judge of the election and the qualifications of its members and all officers and officials of the city appointed by the council. Minor point, but any council member involved in any election dispute should be barred from directly or indirectly participating in resolving that dispute. Section 11.05 provides for any ethics code, which may address this issue. But as I mentioned, coming into this meeting, I think y'all seen it. I haven't seen the ethics code. Does the ethics code address this point?
I sent you a link to it, by the way.
Okay, I did receive that. Thank you. I got it right before the meeting started. I haven't been able to reference.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look through it too.
So I guess I would like to, I'll find out before the next meeting, Rob, if the ethics code already addresses the concern I pointed out.
Okay.
On 3.03. Which is that no council member should be involved in any election dispute, should be judging that. While that makes sense, it may not be codified in our ethics code. Thank you.
Okay. All right. 3.05 compensation. And there was a couple of different comments on this that really basically amounted to that this was not very well written and needed to be clarified. And there's some other good points brought up later, and that is, this is council deciding its own pay, council deciding pay for the mayor, council deciding, do we want council to submit to be able to set their own pay rate?
Who else would do it?
Well, I mean, that's the question. That's the question. Who else would do it?
I don't think anybody else should or could.
But I know, as I noted, this could be, instead of the council should do it, but this should be limited to creating or increasing any compensation for terms that none of the current council members are serving, only for future terms that the current council members have not yet been elected for.
Yeah, I think that needs to be clarified in here, that they can't raise their own pay, well, at least unless they get elected again. Does that make sense? Okay, well, everybody understands it. Let's go on, move on. Okay, now there, and particularly over this past week, there's been a lot of discussion about how much council should be talking to city staff, including the manager, and vice versa. And, you know, now that we are a council manager type system, is the 3.06F still a relevant, or should it still be a relevant directive here? Because in a council manager type system, the mayor is basically a councilman unless there's an emergency going on. And should he be giving advice and consulting with the city manager individually, or should he be only communicating with the city manager as a member of the collective?
I have no issue with how F is currently written. That's the one you just spoke to, correct? F?
Yeah.
Foxtrot?
Foxtrot.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just want to clarify because your
paper says G.
I'm
the
sorry.
agenda item is for G, or your list shows G on it, so I just wanted to be clear on that.
Oh, it
I
does?
don't have an issue with F. Does anyone else?
The G is a typo. Sorry.
Okay. If there's no issues with Foxtrot, I'd like to speak to golf.
Okay. Speak to golf.
Thank you. Referencing again my notes regarding the mayor, G, the mayor may require any item or items to be included on or deleted from the agenda for a council meeting. I would add to this that any agenda item deleted by the mayor needs to be noted on the agenda. I just think that if the mayor or even councilmen elect to have, you know, as I think everyone knows, if 2 or more councilmen want to have something removed from the, added to the agenda, I think, well, 2 things. Okay, apologies, I'm kind of all over the place. If something is removed from the agenda by the mayor, I think that there should be public record of that. I just think the citizens should know that an item was on the agenda, it's been deleted from the agenda. I'm not passionate about that, but I think that I could see some benefit to that, to the citizen, in the form of added transparency for city government.
All right.
Conversely,
it'll make the list to be discussed and debated.
okay, and then as it also says in G, in the second sentence, agenda items which have been specifically requested by 2 or more council members may not be deleted. I would submit that if 2 or more council members want something deleted from the agenda, that should be an option as well. If they have the ability to have something added to the agenda or not deleted from the agenda, why don't they have the ability to remove it from the agenda?
The simple answer to that is if it's on the agenda, it's going to get voted on one way or the other. Whereas if it never gets on the agenda, nobody ever hears about it.
Okay. Okay, those are my only comments on G.
Frank?
I think you raised a good point. I never thought of this. Once the agenda is published, I don't think anybody can remove it. That's a state law, correct? The mayor can't remove something after the agenda is published.
Our city ordinance.
Read this as having to do with creating the agenda.
There's something in our city ordinance, I forget the ordinance number, Frank, but there is the ability by city ordinance through our Rosenberg's Rules of Procedures that we have that are a part of that ordinance that I think it's a super majority of council members want something removed from the agenda, they can have it removed from the agenda. Now that I'm thinking of that.
Well, no. I'm talking about before you go to the council meeting. If once my point, I understand what I think I understand what you said, but that's a legal question, Aaron. Once the agenda is published, that item's going to be discussed by the council unless the council at the meeting removes it or decides to consider it at some later date. Something they got to act on it one way or the other. They got to do with it.
Deal with it. Yeah, they got to deal with it.
And I think the point that, and so the way this reads, Paul, if I'm understanding your point, and that's what I'm trying to do, Mr. Chairman, this probably has to do with the agenda after it's published.
Well, it's not noted on here.
Creating an agenda.
And
So maybe G should read. So are you suggesting that this is in where it says may not be deleted, may be in conflict with the reality that council can discuss it and then remove it from the agenda by vote?
well, it doesn't have to be by vote. They can move to table it. Aaron,
You got to have it on the agenda to have a vote.
correct. No, and he's talking about deleting it.
Yeah, Aaron, my question is, once the agenda is published, it's on the web page, it's been published, it's on the bulletin board, etc. That agenda cannot be changed.
It gets changed every week here.
Council meetings. And the mayor can't. And you may recall this has happened during my tenure. The mayor can't pull an agenda item on its own from an agenda during the meeting. Correct?
Well, so our current charter states that the mayor may require any item or items to be included on or deleted from the agenda for a council meeting. It doesn't state, it doesn't give a deadline.
I think Frank's asking if that's contrary to state law.
No, I don't believe it is contrary to state law. That's what I've been looking up while you are talking. And then the only thing that state law, let me pull back. So there are very few actual state laws with regard to the agenda, unless you're talking about the Open Meetings Act. Now, the Open Meetings Act just requires that you have an item posted a minimum of 72 hours before discussion. It doesn't necessarily deal with removal of items from the agenda. So, and when it comes to preparing the agenda, there are probably half a dozen or more attorney general opinions with regard to preparing the agenda and the process for it. And the municipalities have, it allows municipalities to enact local rules that establish a process for citizens to request that items be placed on the agenda and for the council to adopt rules for developing the agenda. So we have a set of local rules, i.e. our ordinances. Section 1.332 speaks directly to agenda for council meetings. And interestingly, it says that the city secretary or designee shall prepare the agenda and present the agenda to the city manager for review, modification, and approval. The city manager, the acting city manager, the mayor, or the mayor pro tem, in the absence of the mayor, must approve the agenda prior to the posting of the agenda. That's what it says. So it has to get approved prior to posting. Now, can you amend your agenda after you've posted it? Absolutely. Happens all the time. as long as you're not adding something less than 72 hours before your council meeting, you're fine. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that. You can either amend the agenda or have a supplemental agenda. So there's not that limitation.
Rob, Mr. Chairman, it's the 72-hour trigger.
Mhm.
After 70 posted agenda, the agenda can't be changed after the 72-hour time frame.
I think what Aaron's saying is nothing can be added to it, and that's what the Open Meeting Act says.
Right.
What our local,
Yeah,
and then our
absolutely.
local ordinances would govern whether or not anything could be deleted from it.
Right.
Is that what you're saying, Aaron?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Well, I think the issue Paul's raised, should our charter deal with it? And
Well, I certainly think that if something is removed after the 72-hour posting, it should be noted as to whether it was removed by the mayor or it should be, or was removed for some other reason. I think an explanation once it's posted is not a bad idea, but you know, it's up here now. It's on the list. We don't have to debate it and discuss it right now, or we're going to be here forever. Okay.
3.08.
3.08. Okay. A removal for missing meetings. I think, Frank, I think this was yours, and you wanted to remove the regularly scheduled meetings. Is that correct?
yes. So if you miss 3 meetings, you're subject to removal.
Unless excused by council.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Now we're getting into other issues. Who could make the excuse?
Yeah, that begs the question. What's the process for excusing?
and then the other thing is depending on, you know, when you sign up to be a councilman, you want to attend most of the meetings, but the mayor's the one that sets the meetings and the time for them. And if he wants somebody out of there, he could just set them when he knows that person can't be there.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, we have regularly scheduled meetings that are set.
Yep.
That is the meeting. Now he can set special called meetings anytime he wants, but that doesn't apply because failure to attend 3 consecutive regularly scheduled council meetings,
Yep.
it only applies to the regular meetings, not to your special call.
I agree, but Frank wants to change that to
Any
meetings.
Right.
And I don't know. I think that would be.
I think it's worthy of discussion.
That's certainly worthy of discussion. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and then Frank, I believe this one's yours. 3.7. Well, 3.7 announced when you have a vacancy, but 3.09. And I never even knew that there was a order of succession listed until I got on this council,
Yeah.
but apparently there is.
Mr. Chairman, I don't understand what the order of succession is. And that's why I'm suggesting it be clarified. Now,
Okay.
if the order of succession is clear, in other words, the P&Z chair is first, the BOA second, so that's fine. I don't read it that way, but that's all.
Yeah, it isn't very clear, and it should say after the elections are held in the following order, and then list which ones are in order, and you know, whichever of those is the biggest whoop-de-doo honcho. We can figure that out later. But I agree that should be clarified.
We should also make note, Mr. Chairman, that this section would be impacted if your recommendation is to go to longer terms than 2 years.
Yeah, we're gonna need a little more help with that 2-year versus 3-year stuff, and what part of the Constitution affects it, and what the limitations are if that happens. I mean, unless I don't even know why those that are in favor of 3 years. Can you tell me why?
Same reason the mayor's got 3 years.
What is that reason?
Well, the mayor doesn't have 3 years. He's got a 2-year term.
Yeah, he does. I know Cedar Park has it on the ballot right now to extend from 2 years to 3 years. The protagonist for that is that they feel like the added tenure, more experience, less turnover, ability to better govern.
Yeah.
Most people argue that it has to do with stability of the council because you get that experience.
Less turnover.
Okay. There's a lot of arguments that can go back and forth on that one. Let's not debate it tonight, please. Okay. All right. Let's see. The next one I've got on the list is 315.
But Rob, hold on.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. You've got some, Paul. Go ahead.
Thank you. On 3.08, there's a just typo, but excuse me. In the first, or I guess technically it's the second paragraph under subsection D of 3.08, about halfway into that paragraph, it reads, upon the receipt of a complaint, the mayor or the mayor pro tem, Tim, as appropriate, shall cause yada, yada, yada. The note I made to myself is why in executive session, why not in open session? And again, the same thing in the next of the larger paragraphs. Is that something we should look at? If there's an issue with the council member, should that hearing take place in executive session, or should it take place in open session?
Well, since you brought that up, I've been trying to figure out what exception would allow it to be in executive session, which is kind of the way I always look at it. Is if it's in executive session, it's got to have a reason to be there. And the only thing I can think of in this case is that it's some sort of personnel decision, but I don't think that's going to fly with an elected official. Aaron, what are your thoughts on that?
I have the same question, Mr. Chairman. It's, the Open Meetings Act would not necessarily allow for an executive session for something specific to this. The only other exception is advice of counsel. If the council is seeking advice from their attorney on what the legal remedies are for the infraction. But I agree with you.
Okay.
So, I mean, I have to ask, Frank, you having been through this process, what are your thoughts on this? Executive session versus open session?
Shoot. I'd rather not comment on this deal.
Okay. Thank you.
If I guess I would, let me not comment.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, we can add this for future agenda item, or add this to our list?
We can, and although I think if Aaron remains clear as city council, being the council for the city, excuse me, that it's wouldn't even be compliant under the Open Meetings Act. I think we
So we
probably
need to address this language in the charter, right?
Yeah, we probably will need to change that to open or regular session.
Thank you. I think now we're
that was
3.15.
That was a good catch too, Paul, by the way.
Well, your next item is 3.15, but I have something in 3.11 and 3.13.
Sure. 3.11,
Yes,
council
sir.
meetings, fix the time and dates for regular meetings. Okay?
Yes, sir. The last sentence, notice of all meetings shall be in accordance with state law. It's just a very frank question. Are we in compliance with this? I mean, I'm assuming we are. I'm assuming we're noticing everything correctly.
Well, under the Open Meeting Act, I think Aaron will probably weigh in and say, yeah,
Well,
we're doing it okay.
Okay, and I guess really at the end of the day, it's
Bless you,
not
Aaron. I
relevant.
saw you sneezing. Did you hear his question under 311?
311, Aaron, last sentence, it's kind of a minor question as an aside. Are we compliant with state law with how we're noticing council meetings?
So state law only requires that you post it a minimum of 72 hours unless it's a emergency meeting and it meets specific requirements. We have to post a paper, you have to post it in a place that's generally accessible to the public a minimum of 72 hours prior to the meeting. So we post it on the website, and Sandra also puts it in the little display case thing that's there at City Hall. Now, I don't think that they're outside City Hall, if you notice it. So those are the things that meet the requirements. But
So we're
most
compliant.
cities only post it on the website.
Assuming everything that's written in the posting is in accordance with the Open Meeting Act. In other words, does each line item give appropriate notice, et cetera, which is one reason why last week I was trying to set up some sort of a submission for compliance review before it got posted for agendas, but that's neither here nor there. Plus, you all don't need to hear that fight. But that's, yeah.
Okay.
You know, assuming you're saying that the notice is fine, Paul.
Yeah, I just like a little, let's, make sure everything is in order. I just highlighted that to myself. Just want to make sure all of our city ordinance for noticing everything is compliant with state law. Clearly it is. In 3.13, just the last three words of that of that section state in the last sentence, and make these minutes available to citizens of the city for a reproduction fee, under 3.13. And the notes I made that I shared with everyone was, is it necessary to charge a reproduction fee since everything can be transmitted electronically at no cost? I guess there could be compensation for the time to locate minutes if they are not readily identifiable, but after all, they're posted on the city's website anyway. So should we just delete those last four words, for a reproduction fee?
Well, I don't think we can, because you never know when somebody's going to say, well, I don't want it in my email. I want the paper.
Okay, so thus we need to have that in there. Okay.
Yeah, I think you got to leave the ability to pay for it in there, and it's provided for in state law.
Okay.
So
that's all I have before 3.15. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, 3.15, and this one was mine. Where did it go? Oh, it's in paragraph 2, where it says an ordinance must be enacted whenever the purpose is to regulate persons and property. I think that should probably be an and or property, because when you have and in there, essentially you need them both. That's just, and I don't, you can regulate people without regulating their property, and vice versa. Okay. 3.16, this is ordinance reading, and Frank, I think this was yours, where it's conflicting. It says, in one place it says descriptive title or caption, and in another place it says the caption. It doesn't mention the title. And I think Aaron and Frank both, I mean, I'll ask this question too. I think all you have to do is read the title, as long as you've got the caption and the full description in the notice. Is that correct?
The caption is what you have to publish. That's
Okay.
the published requirement, if that's what you're referring to, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, this was Frank's question. Frank, what's the difference between a descriptive title and a caption then?
Lots. Yeah, I just want, yeah, Aaron has got it. It's just, I think it needs to be clarified. That's all.
Okay.
It's not clear to me what you have to do, what you have to read. And I just think it needs to be clarified.
All right. Well, you're the pro from Dover. You got more experience than all of us put on here. Which one do you think has to be, the caption's got to be published. Does it have to be read, Aaron?
So there's not a legal requirement for what you have to read in a meeting. So essentially what you have to do is provide the document. Now, if it is common practice to read the caption, so it's clear, because the caption should have the descriptor of not just what's being proposed to be changed, but generally why. You know, you're changing section 1.007, the fee ordinance, to add something, to delete something. That's common practice. This particular section, this has to do less to do with the law and more with what you wanted to read for clarity for your people, for the city.
Yeah, the sentence says, one of the sentences says you have to read the caption.
Summarize and fully descriptive title or caption read aloud.
That's not stated tonight. I just think it needs to be clarified.
Okay.
It says one place title or caption, and another sentence says have to read the caption.
Yeah. It should be consistent anyway, whatever it says. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. 3.16, last sentence of the first paragraph. Let's see. Mr. Hunt, was this one yours?
It was, and I think I specifically mentioned a particular level or threshold of indebtedness to possibly require a supermajority, but it fits under a general heading of supermajorities. And the question is, are there any issues that we believe are so significant that they should require supermajority council votes? And if so, those should be embedded in the charter. And the reason they should be embedded in the charter is because of the question that we talked about earlier, which is, if it's only a city ordinance that's requiring a supermajority, that ordinance can be changed at any time by a simple majority.
The only exception to that, Mr. Hunt, is if it's required by state law. But yeah, you're absolutely correct.
So we may decide that there's nothing that should require a supermajority, but if there is, it needs to be in this document.
So what your thoughts are, possibly a section at this point, maybe 3.165 that said, or 3.161 that entitled supermajorities and lists the things that would require a supermajority.
That's correct.
Okay. right. 3.17, and Frank, I think this was yours, and it was kind of one that I kind of glommed onto a little bit. And you stated the city no longer keeps the old code of ordinance book, so that when essentially when something is repealed, it just disappears from the Muni code list, and you can't even tell. You can't even find out what the old law was. Is that kind of your point, or at least it's not easily accessible?
No, that's not my point.
All right.
I mean, it
It
is, but that has to do with researching what the ordinance used to say. Let me not get into that unless you want to. The sentence says the provision of this section shall not apply to the correct. This has to do with publication and posting of ordinances. The provision of this section shall not apply to the correction, amendment, revision, or codification of ordinances of the city in book or pamphlet form. Well, we don't do that now. Now, whether it's a good idea to do it in book or pamphlet form is a separate question, but the sentence is inapplicable. You understand my point?
Yeah, the city's not doing it, so do we want to change it to meet what they're doing, or should we leave it and require it?
And I would say, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how to fix this one necessarily. I've got a wording to fix it, but
let me tell you one of my thoughts on one of these as well is I think we need to have it someplace that it can be not necessarily as easy as Muni code to find, but it needs to be easy to find because, and Aaron, this situation may have changed, but you know, when you finally track down a guy that has not showed up for court for 6 years and he's charged with an ordinance violation, he's charged under some old court ordinance violation that may or may not exist anymore, or may have changed. And I don't know how he would be able to put on a decent defense if he couldn't figure out what it was, but B, I don't know how you'd prosecute him if you couldn't find it easy enough either. I assume you can find him, Aaron, if you really put your mind to it, but nobody else can. So, and I can see that as an issue. So it ought to be trackable somewhere. Yeah, Frank.
Well, now we're into substance. Now we're into what easy to find it. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. Another example, Aaron and members of the council, I think having a pamphlet or book form is a good thing. Vested rights. You know what I'm getting at, Aaron? Mm-hmm. And then so you know when something happened, what were the rules then? And it's hard it can be done. That's right. But it's hard if you don't have the book.
But yeah, my thought is at least once a particular time, you know, once a year or something, it should be done. But I mean, it ought to be noted, there should be a book that every time there's a new ordinance, you can trace it back. But that's difficult to do when you don't have like the same effective date for a bunch of ordinance. You know, the state goes through, they change a bunch of laws and they say, they all take effect on January 1st. Well, that makes it easy. You just publish a new book on January 1st and you're in good shape. But the way the city does it, I don't know how we would do it, but I think it should be required. So, Mr. Roberts, yeah.
I just want to, there's an item I'd like to discuss in 3.17 unrelated to what you're speaking to. I just want to make sure.
Okay. All right. But anyway.
So, Mr. Chairman, it is done. If you look in our, if you look at our ordinances on Muni Code,
I did.
you see there are annotations at the bottom that tell you what ordinance and what date it was amended. That's there. And then the only limitation, or I guess handicap I'll say, that happens is when the prior version of the ordinance is before 20, let's see, on our city website, there's in the document center, if you look in our ordinances, it goes back to 2013. So anything pre-2013, that's where you have problems. And we have lots of ordinances that go back that far. And so that's when I always have to email Sandra, and she has all of that stuff archived. She had it all digitally imaged. So she has it and she sends me stuff regularly. But I agree with you that for the lay person who doesn't do legal research, you know, it might be a little daunting, but it is all there.
Well, at the very least, do we just need to meet Frank's recommendation and change book or pamphlet to electronic archives? So at least it reflects how we're doing it now.
He makes a very important argument about vested rights, and really maybe historically that hasn't been as big of an issue because we haven't had a ton of new developments, but that's going to change very soon. Very soon. So
Okay.
I agree.
All right. So we may have a lot of work to do on that one. Let's see. $318B.
Rob,
Yeah.
on 3.17, there is one part of this I'd like to see if others would like to discuss. And that is where you see item 1 listed in the middle of the paragraph, where it says in a newspaper of general circulation within the city. We've all kind of talked about this and are aware that we don't have a newspaper, we don't have things being published in a where there's a wide audience. So do we want to discuss other mediums in which we could publish notifications?
Well, again, this is kind of one of those terms of art. That's the phrase that's used in virtually every one of these sort of things. But
is that the word we want to use? Is that the most appropriate word?
Well, it's what state law requires.
It's hard to say because when they publish stuff now, they publish it in, hell, I don't even know where that place that newspaper covers. Hill Country News. Is that Liberty Hill or Burnett or something?
They really only report literally on just Cedar Park and Leander. And I've asked them why they don't have anything on us. They said it's just a lack of staff. But okay, so that doesn't need to be touched. We can move on. Thank you.
Well, it's a term. That's one of those terms of art. Do we want to define it or not? But that's sort of the thing I was talking about. Okay. 318B. Mr. Hunt, I'm going to let you address this one because I just wasn't quite digging your chili from your notes.
Hang on. Oh, the only thing I added to it was we have some exclusions to what we can do in an emergency ordinance. And the only thing I added was with respect to public utility rates. And so I just added a phrase that said you can't change the rates themselves or the formulation for how you reach the, what wording did I use here? Oh, that the utility invoices are calculated. So you can't change the number, the rate, and you also can't change the formula for how it spits the invoices out.
Well, I mean, they just did that.
Yeah, we just did that.
So and I think we're still under the emergency order, aren't we, Aaron? Is it Did it end finally?
Yeah, it's over. That wasn't an emergency ordinance. Emergency ordinances are a whole different animal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look,
That was just a
emergen-
regular ordinance to adopt the method of calculation that applies for this next year in response to the
yeah.
issue that we experience as far as the
I get
weather
that.
related event, but it's not an emergency ordinance.
Okay, so an ordinance passed during an emergency isn't necessarily an emergency ordinance?
Well, so the ordinance that just passed wasn't done at an emergency meeting.
I understand
An
that.
emergency meeting is something that you hold to protect life or limb. It's, you hold an emergency meeting with, I think it's now you can have as little as 1 hour's notice. You're doing it on an emergency basis. The ordinance that got passed wasn't an emergency ordinance. Emergency ordinances are like, we need, we need to pass this ordinance because if we don't, all people will die.
I get that. But I know we were an extended period in a declared emergency status at the city. I mean, and I didn't, I guess what you're saying is an emergency ordinance has to be one that is taken up and passed at an emergency session, emergency meeting.
Not necessarily. You can
During
have
a
an
declared emergency period.
Right. You can have you can have an emergency meeting where you pass an emergency ordinance, or you can have, if you have 72 hours, you can have a regular meeting where you pass an emergency ordinance that only applies for a limited duration. An ordinance that says it's illegal or, it's in violation of our ordinances to put your boat in the water for 60 days because there's some weird algae and we have to keep the, whatever crusties off the boats. Something to that effect would be more in light of an emergency ordinance. No dogs are allowed to go within 20 feet of any reservoir or water body. That would be, for the next 60 days. That's an emergency type ordinance to protect the dogs.
Okay. The emergency ordinances have to be designated emergency ordinances.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's good. That's all I needed. All right. Frank.
Gage, I'm trying to get a distinction between how you calculate the rate and the rate. I think they're the same thing.
How you calculate the invoice.
Well,
so the rate's going to be based on X number of cents per gallon, right? But then you're going to have a formula that's going to get you to the bottom line invoice of that charge that's based on that rate.
Yeah, you could keep the base rate the same, but charge it on, you have a multiplier. So you change the formula,
Right.
You add a multiplier to it because you're in some weird emergency situation. Well, that his addition wouldn't allow you to do that. The actual rate itself doesn't change. It's $3.27 per 1,000 gallons of water. And for some crazy reason, I can't imagine this council would do it or any other, but said, okay, it's an emergency situation. We're trying to get people to ration their water. So we're going to basically not double the rate, but we're going to add a multiplier to it for the next 60 days to discourage people from using water.
but that changes the rate. That's a rate change. That's the point.
It effectively does. I don't know that it legally does. It may be such an odd circumstance we don't need to deal with it. Just
Okay. Either that or we can clarify this and just say you can't change the rates charged by public utilities, which I pretty much think that's what it says anyway, but we could probably make it more clear if we,
Guys, I could live with us walking away from this one if
Okay.
you want to. I won't have
Okay.
any heartburn, I promise you.
all right. Let's see, 319 adoption of the code. Frank, you had some comparison between 317 and 19. 317 may require codification and 319 says may codify. Should we change it to shall?
Yeah, and that's it. Mr. Chairman, I just think it needs to be clarified, that's all.
Okay. Changing
Which
that
part
to
of
shall.
3.19?
3.19, third word in.
Okay. I had some input on this, thoughts on this as well.
All right.
I agree with that request. And I would go down and you look at well, it's one big long sentence. And construction and establish appropriate penalties for their violation. It currently says copies of adopted codes. I struck out on the notes I shared with everyone the words copy of and just replaced it with all adopted codes. And then if you guys look at the diagrams, it's a little bit easier to follow. But I also, after the words regulations shall be, it currently reads and technical regulations shall be available for purchase. I've substituted language after the word be, and that substitute language is published on the city's website and printed copies shall be available for purchase. So instead of it reading copies of adopted codes, trade regulations, and standards and technical regulations shall be available for purchase, I would propose that it read all adopted codes, trade regulations, and standards and technical regulations shall be published on the city's website and printed copies shall be available for purchase.
Yeah, but the copies of adopted codes, trade regulations, that would mean the city website would have to publish the, I assume we operate under a uniform plumbing code and a uniform building code and a uniform fire code and a uniform, all of that. All of those would be published on the city's website.
Oh, sorry.
Is that what you're saying, Paul?
I'm saying that all adopted codes and the following items shall be published on the city's website and printed copies shall be available for purchase. So just like a little while ago, the city can charge for the copies if somebody wants a copy. That remains in here by saying, and printed copies shall be available for purchase. But basically what we're saying is all of this can be accessible on the city's website. It reads better if you look at the red line version of what I said.
Okay, I just don't know whether we want to get into what all is going to get published on the city's website. I mean, it's getting a little more I mean, they got to be available. And I think if you make them available on the website, you probably don't have to sell them because they can get them for free. Frank.
I don't think we're not doing this for the standard codes. We're not, in other words, and I've never had anybody ask for us to buy them. The standard codes are available for purchase online. And we've adopted international building codes.
Right.
So you can get them online.
Okay.
2, if you put the international codes that we have adopted in the paper copies on a bookshelf, they're going to be about 5 feet long.
Not to mention the cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those are my notes I made. Thanks for
Yeah.
considering, everyone.
But I don't disagree with what Paul said either.
No, I think, I mean, I don't either. I think the website could certainly have links to those codes, so that they use their bandwidth, not ours. But because they're out there, and then yeah, they're already available for sale. But you know, my question is, do we want to leave this in and make them available? Because this, when they says shall be available for purchase, to me that means they can buy them from the city.
Right.
Does the city sell them? I didn't think so.
Does the city want to sell them?
I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
Then I think we should say copies of the adopted codes, trade regulations, and standards and technical regulations shall be referenced on the city website, or something like that, or we can direct them to where to buy them rather than force the city to be because this seems to make the city sell them.
Okay, so we need to come back to this one.
Yeah. And that, although I think that brought up a big point that none of us picked up, so thanks for mentioning it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason, and there's several things that we've discussed. 319 says the city may by ordinance adopt a codification of its ordinances, and it says may.
Yeah, we talked about that, and we said, I said, basically, you want to change that word to shall, and it probably should be. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. No, I think we covered that one already.
All right.
All right, 321. And this is one that I put in here. It says the council has the power to inquire into and conduct of any city office, blah, 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 inquire into their conduct of an officer. Basically, it says the council can do investigations, but and issue subpoenas and witnesses and that sort of stuff. But quite frankly, most of the council members are not in the business of investigating stuff or digging through discovery material or looking into stuff. And my suggestion was to add the ability and to allow for them to designate and to designate somebody to do it, and just by it changing the council or its designee shall have the power to inquire or do whatever, in case they wanted to appoint somebody to look further into some specific matter that they don't have the experience in doing. They might want to hire an attorney to do it. They might want to hire a cop to do it. They might want to hire a private investigator. Just gives them a little more power. Frank.
Mr. Chairman, was this the intent to kind of replace the council, or in addition to the council hire somebody to investigate, and their investigation and findings become public separately from whatever the council comes up with? So that's
I thought the council should have the right and the ability to designate somebody to conduct the investigation, because that's not something that most folks do.
Yeah, I understand that. My question has to do with your intent about who gets to see that investigation by the appointed outfit or person.
The council.
Only the council.
Yeah, they can appoint somebody to investigate and return a report to them only, or make their or make the public
Or
the
make it
findings
public,
public. Yeah,
whatever. Right, I'm good with it.
exactly,
Thanks.
exactly. Okay. 2.21. .01B. Okay. Well, I have on the list here 4.01B, but then when I don't. Mine is goofed up. The copy I'm looking at has under set 4.82, so starts off with city secretary.
I noticed that as well, but the version I got from you, the most recent version I received, which is the one I think you sent today,
Yeah,
it did include that. It's what happened when you did the PDF to Word conversion. It removed all of that, but in the version I got from you today, it's back.
it's back. Okay,
Yeah, the
good.
city manager portion is
Okay.
all back in.
Yeah. Okay, I noticed there was a few conversion issues.
And I do have something to say on 4.01.
All right.
In the very first paragraph of 4.01, does anybody not have 4.01 besides Rob?
Even though I sent out the good one.
While you're looking for it, it's not too involved, Rob. I'll just start talking in the interest of
There
time.
it is. Okay. Oh yeah, it's a long one.
So referencing the affirmative vote in the very first, in the second sentence of paragraph 1, it says the affirmative vote of 5 members of the council shall be required to appoint a person as city manager. The notes I made to myself are that it takes the vote of 5 council members to remove the city manager, but the city manager's salary can be decreased by a majority vote. In other words, just 4 instead of 5. The council could, so for example, in an extreme example would be the council could reduce the city manager's salary to 0 and effectively terminate him that way. So in other words, I think what I'm getting at is if it takes 5 members to hire or remove a city manager, maybe we need, it should be 5 members for the salary as well. Where Frank's gonna correct me here.
No
Oh,
debate
so-
tonight.
Okay. So do we want, how do we, if it takes 5 count, if it takes an affirmative vote of 5 to hire and fire a city manager, should it take 5 council members to set the salary and the affirmative vote on a motion?
I would be okay with that.
I would think a city manager would be able to take the hand if his salary got cut to 0. But
So that's the point.
yeah, no, I
I
see
don't know,
what
it's
you're
just
saying.
kind of pointing out a little bit of an extreme example contradiction.
Yep, no, I understand it.
So I'm just sharing my observations with everybody, and if it's something y'all want to talk about, great. If not, we can move on.
Okay, now that I've actually found the paragraph, the section that I wanted to point to was section 4.01B, and where it says the city manager appoints, supervises, gives direction to all departments, offices, and agencies of the city, hires, suspend. I honestly think the city manager should only appoint. I'm not sure the city manager should appoint city officials, period. And the city officials that he does appoint currently now are the city secretary, the city attorney and the municipal judge. But if he does appoint some of the city officials, I think he should only appoint the city officials that he would effectively wind up supervising, which would eliminate the judge. The judge doesn't work for the city manager.
I concur.
I could see him appointing his people. But I think the city council should appoint city officials.
I think your logic is sound. I mean, he should be appointing and hiring people that answer directly to, well, anyway, I like the idea of the suggestion.
Okay, Frank?
I think you said two things. One of them, and so I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. One, you said you don't think the city manager ought to be able to either hire or fire the judge, correct?
Well, he can't fire the judge now, but currently he appoints the judge.
Okay. And then there's the judge. Then you said officials.
Well,
That's everybody else that works for the city.
Well, the city has some specific officials. I mean, I think the city secretary is an official. I think Erin's an official. Nope, she's not. Okay, so there's not everybody's a city official because she's shaking her head like crazy. She doesn't want to be a city official. I can tell.
My point would be that you do not want the city council to appoint, hire, or fire, or appoint all city officials.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Again, that's not is that a defined term that needs to be defined?
I'm gonna let Erin jump in because
there are certain by statute, state statute, people who are determined to be city officials. City attorney's not one of them.
Lucky you.
Thank you. But so I need to look and double check whether, obviously you have, so this is a term of art. Local government code outlines who qualifies as a city official. I want to check that list. I'm trying to pull it up now so we can talk in real time.
And just to clarify a little bit, Frank, I was putting it up as essentially a 3-option deal. Okay, either we leave it the same where he appoints everybody. We change it so he does not appoint the city judge, or we change it so that he does not appoint the city judge and the city officials. What I consider a city official, and let's see what Erin has to say here as soon as the magic wheel is spinning.
We're going to get this later, I think, in your list.
Probably.
It isn't, and I don't remember with respect to the judge, the council has to approve that also. So that's essentially the city manager recommends, council agrees, correct?
Well, it says the city manager appoints and the council, well, it doesn't say ratify. It doesn't say, I forget what the term is.
Yeah,
but there's clearly some misunderstanding about what that term is, because I heard, at least during the most recent arguments about the judiciary here, I heard at least 2 council people say, hey, he appoints, we affirm, and we don't have any choice. So, that's
that isn't what I don't think that's what that means, but whatever.
Well, I don't know what it means either.
I think it says the same thing about the city secretary and who's the other person that goes to the council.
And Frank, if that's the case, then it should say city manager nominates and the city council appoints. And that I don't have a problem with. If, but it was going to be my suggested terminology, unless you all wanted to have elected judges, which a lot of cities do.
So that this issue fundamentally has to do with the judge only, correct?
It can deal with the judge only, or it can with the city officials. It could say that he nominates the city's.
Now we're going to go back to Aaron, Mr. Chairman. There are a whole bunch of city officials that I don't think the council needs to get into, and Aaron's going to tell us who they are.
So in the traditional sense, city official is typically referred to as someone who's elected, right? Now there are other terms with regard to, for example, your building official. Roy holds a title in that he has certain discretionary decision-making authority, but his position is not an appointed position. I, on the other hand, have no official decision-making authority except when it comes to my duties as the prosecutor, and I hold no title. So I think the term that, as it's used in this context, you're referring to those folks who are elected officials. So you have elected officials, you have appointed, and then you have those who hold the title because of their particular position.
Who are the appointed officials?
Let me look and see if there's an official list in city ordinance. I mean, in
Well, it'd have to be here because, a lot of them are they can be elected some places too. So, Gage.
Maybe if instead of getting caught in trying to work through the nuances of what is and is not a city official, tie it back to what you talked about originally, which is that the city manager should not appoint, or hire or fire anybody that he is not a supervisor of.
That's basically the municipal judge. Other than that, he's the boss of everybody. Mm-hmm. Unless the clerks work for the judiciary now, but I think they still report back to the city manager, which might be a little screwy, but we can live with it.
Yeah, I'm reading it, Mr. Chairman, in the charter. I think the city secretary, the municipal court judge, the city attorney, and the police chief are the folks that go to the council.
They don't
require appointment
rubber stamps
or approval by the council. Well,
yeah. Okay.
Nope.
And that's basically who I was referring to.
Yeah.
In which case, I think he should nominate them, but they're appointed by the council rather than appointed by the city manager and approved by the council, because that's a rubber stamp. Okay. And I knew I saw a list of them somewhere. And that was it, Frank. Okay. Let's, okay, 21, or 4.03, municipal judge. Now that we are a court of record, they have to be licensed to practice law in the state of Texas. And I would suggest that we put a time limit on that for a minimum of 5 years, 10 years, 8 years, whatever you guys think is appropriate. I think they ought to be residents of Lago Vista. You could get away with it back in the days when when Lago Vista didn't have any lawyers living out here, but hell, you can't throw a rock and not hit a lawyer now. And then it should be appointed by the city council after nomination by city manager, not elected. Or elected, excuse me. And they should be designated essentially as a city official, which They may be or they not, but I heard an argument that they were vendors and should be terminated every 5 years as such. So that is what I'm trying to prohibit. Got to remember, all the people that we elect are, may not have a background in civics, but so we got to guide them on the important stuff the best we can here. And I said for the city attorney, the same process and requirements as judge. But I don't, they can, in the past, I mean, Aaron, you live out here, don't you?
No,
No? Oh.
that's
Okay.
a good example. Don't do this.
I can't afford to live here.
Okay. But in the old days, they hired a law firm rather than an individual. It's hired essentially to be the city attorney. So, but I don't really have any qualms about 405 because as an attorney, you have completely different roles. You don't necessarily have to live here to be a hired gun for the city. And
I think that's actually 404 on
is
my
that a
version.
typo? Yeah, that I think that came off of the bad,
Right.
the missing
But
DLC.
I would like to speak to 4.05 city police.
Okay, go ahead.
In several cities, and I'm thinking of Austin in particular, it's my understanding, perhaps it's uninformed, but it's my understanding that in a lot of cities, the chief of police is on a contract for 2 years, 3 years. They negotiate a contract with him and he's there in that position for a set amount of time. I think that in certain important positions, it's good to let people not get too comfortable, whether it be a mayor, an attorney, a judge, or a chief of police. And I just wonder, do we want to put, for lack of better terms, a term limit or change that part of our hiring practice of the chief of police? Should it be just you're in the job until it's an at will, leave it to be an at will, or does his contract come up for renewal every so many years like a city manager?
Well, as a judge, you have a term. You're appointed for 2 years. So
Right.
The city attorney, I don't know, Aaron, you're there for life unless you screw up. Okay.
But our city manager, the chief of I don't know what is orthodox in other cities. Does anybody know what other cities? Frank, you probably know. Aaron, what do they do in other cities? Are the chief of police, are they hired like Aaron until there's a personnel?
A lot of the cities that I'm familiar with, the people in those positions aren't necessarily hired for a term, but they're given a contract, and then the contract gets renewed every 3 years or 4 years. That is effectively a term for them because the city council can say, yeah, we're not going to renew that contract.
Mm-hmm.
But
what do we do in Lago Vista? We do not do that,
You're
correct?
an employee.
they're employees.
Yeah. City manager, the city attorney, myself, and the chief of police, city secretary, we're all employees. It doesn't have to be that way. You could make your city attorney a contract person. Just be prepared to negotiate and not have them paid like a staff person, because there's a big difference. If you're going to put someone on contract, you're going to be looking at the same kind of terms and provisions as you do for like your city manager with payouts for when they leave, because there comes a lot of uncertainty with that kind of thing. Same with your police. It's not uncommon to have them be someone who's authorized or who is under a contract, has a contract with the city versus like your city manager. If you want to get rid of them, you're going to be paying a hefty price to do that very often. Right now, you know, a lot of the smaller cities, they're all employees of the city. They're employees of their departments. Our police chief, you know, has a long history of, you know, paying into TML TMRS, our retirement system. So
Danny's great. He's been here a long time, and he's a resident of our city. We were talking about residency.
Right.
One day he will retire.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I would personally like to see our chief of police being a resident of Lago Vista, who knows the community. That's really important, is the police, the community they're policing, they're familiar with them and in an intimate way. Would the changes you were talking about, Rob, about, for example, a residency, the judge needing to be a resident, is this the place where we would want to stipulate the chief of police being a resident?
I don't have any, I never thought of the chief of police as a particular, as necessarily,
I mean, I'd rather a local guy
be a resident, but I think it depends, you know, if it's important for the chief of police to be a resident, it's important for the judge to be a resident too. Because, you know, we deal with people, the same people all the time. We set their bail, you know, we gotta deal with them in the, at Super S when we're standing in line and somebody you find is standing right in front of you, or you set their kids bail, they're standing there. So it's you know, it is a community knowledge is important in a lot of different areas, but and I don't know that it's a requirement of the chief of police. Generally, the officers that are out here, and I can tell you, the officers, because I've dealt with all of them, the ones that weren't residents and the ones that are residents, they all have essentially a common set of knowledge. You know, they know who the troublemakers are. They know whether they live here or not. And I think that'd go on to the chief of police as well.
So I would, for 4.05, I would like to see a wording added that he'd be a resident of Lago Vista. Does anybody else desire that as well?
It doesn't bother me that it's in there, but
okay, nobody's in favor of that, so that's fine. Let's move on.
Frank's got an issue with it. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, the answer to the question, I don't think many cities deal with some of the level of detail in their charter that we're discussing, and I wouldn't add it because I think it ties the hands of the council, and so fundamentally, I wouldn't. I like councils that have some flexibility, and I think this is one of the places that you wouldn't want to tie their hands. And I could go into some more detail, but
I think that reasoning is sound. Thank you for consideration.
But there's another consideration too, Paul, and that is a lot of police officers do not like to live in the cities that they're police officers in, for the very reason that they're known by the troublemakers, and they arrested them and dealt with them, and they fear retaliation.
I believe that same argument applies to your judge. I think the big picture consideration that I would encourage you guys to think about is what charter language is going to give the council the best opportunity to find and hire the most qualified person for the job. That's really what you want to focus on, whether they live here or not, because there are arguments on both sides. Living here can lead, especially for judges, I've seen it in small towns time and time again, judge knows the neighbor, they know the families, they go boating with people, you know, they don't live their life in a bubble or in isolation. They have friends, and that has the potential to lead to undue influence in how certain things are handled. So it cuts both ways.
Well, so do four
Really what you
councilmen that
wanna
play
look at
golf
is-
together every day.
Say it again?
So do four councilmen that play golf together every day.
Well,
I mean,
so I come back to I think the big picture for your charter, this is your constitution for the city, is to give your council the best opportunity to find the most qualified people. And when you're looking at it, look at what are the qualifications of the people who will do the job. Having a certain number of years of experience is really a regular, that's a common part of a charter. You want to have somebody that knows how to practice municipal law, someone who knows, who isn't a rookie police officer, someone who isn't a rookie judge, maybe. It's those kind of things that you want to look at. Residency. I mean, if your citizens want to vote that in as a requirement, it's not illegal to do it, but there are certainly pluses and minuses on both sides of the table for requiring those people to live within your jurisdiction, especially under the circumstances that they operate.
If we were a city of 500,000 people that had a huge talent pool to pull from, that would be one thing. But I just don't know that we want to tie our hands like this right now.
I think you guys are right.
well, under normal circumstances, I would agree with you. But, a year and 2 months ago, you had 110 years of legal experience on the judiciary here with 3 guys that all had been lawyers for over 30 years. 2 of them that have been judges for over 30 years. Another one that had been a judge for over 5 years. And they replaced him with a guy that had no experience as a judge and had quit practicing law 2 years earlier. So, in a perfect world, you're right, but then I think we need to up the requirements from a if you're going to have a big pool like that, then let's up the requirements and say that they need 10 years experience as an attorney and 5 years experience as a judge before you hire them, because you got the whole state to look at. So
and the city just has to be prepared to pay those people at the level that they have that qualified experience. That's the balance.
Yeah, 110 years of experience working for free.
Can we let's move on to the next item, if we may.
So anyway, all right, let's move on to the next one. So, I mean, the system can be abused if you allow it to be abused. And, and honest, sitting there and hearing that, well, all vendors ought to be replaced every 5 years and the judge is a vendor, that's not something that gives me much confidence in this. You say you want to give council as much flexibility as possible, but we shouldn't be looking at this from like we're 6 ex-counselors or 6 guys that want to be counselors. We should be looking at this as what the people think. Okay. Let's see. In the human resources, do we want to see any anti-retaliation language in this anywhere? Because it is state law that you can't retaliate against employees. Do we want to say that it needs to at least comply with state law, or do we want to expand that? And the reason I say this is because, and Frank, you were a victim of it. I mean, people come forward, they tell you stuff, but they're afraid to come forward personally and tell anybody else.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by I'm a victim of this, but
Well, you had some beliefs that there was some wrongdoing taking place in the procurement process, and you weren't victim of retaliation. You're a victim of a circumstance. But somebody had to tell you that, right?
we're going to get into some detail I prefer not to get into. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Jay.
I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna say I want, what I would like to do is foster enough freedom to where employees or and employees are covered under the whistleblower statute, but ex-employees are not. Contractors are not. Councilmen are not. Committee members are not. Appointed officials are not. So, you know, we certainly, I think, ought to insist that do we want to state that under the human relations or the HR section that they will at least comply with state law in terms of anti-retaliation staff?
Well, that was my comment in general, because I believe all the section says we're going to be compliant with is the charter.
Right.
And do we need to add any additional standards to that in the way of state law or whatever else we feel like should be an applicable guiding basis for our HR policies?
Right. Right. Frank, did you have your hand pop up there for a second? I thought I saw it.
No, it was me.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you? Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, my question had to do with the last sentence in 23. Let me just say that I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but it's okay to say in accordance with state law, because you don't have to say that in the charter. You don't have a choice, but to say it in the charter, that's fine. But I don't understand what the last sentence means, directing council to pass ordinances to do so.
Well, if the policies aren't in effect now, then council should pass an ordinance that directs them to comply with state law.
I think that's unnecessary, but whatever.
Okay. All right. Maybe. Okay.
Well, you don't get to break state law just because it's not in the charter. So
I understand, but the charter also says all over the place that this has got to comply with state law, or this is state law guides this. So I just think adding it here would be helpful.
Not inconsistent with, right?
Correct. Okay.
because there are some things that have changed recently with regard to HR that I think are really important. Not that, it's changing all the time, and it would make sure that our HR person stays on top of that or seeks legal advice to make sure they're on top of it. But yeah.
Exactly. If we can help send people in to talk to you before they do something, I think that's a big plus. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. All right. I know we said we'd get through number 5 tonight, but we've been here for 2.5 hours. I don't want these to go on too long. Let's pick it up at number 5 next time. And in the meantime, I will try to get a comprehensive, I'll start getting you some red lines on the non-substantive stuff that doesn't really require debate, that we all kind of shook our heads yes on, so we can say, yeah, that's right, yeah, that's right, yeah, that's right. Okay. All right. All right. I know we said we would meet every week. but we do have other conflicts with other meetings and stuff. Do you think it would be more appropriate and it would be more effective that we meet every other week, the second and fourth week of each month, as opposed to every week? Because Monday nights, the first Monday night every month is usually the BOA. And I'm involved in that. And I know, Aaron, you had some other issues, conflicting stuff. And Shalane, you've got Parks and Rec on, those are usually on Mondays too, aren't they?
Aaron,
No, those are the third Wednesday of each month. It's Board of Adjustment that meets on Mondays. We just happened to have a work session for Parks and Rec that was last month.
Okay. All right.
Rob, I'm now on Building and Standards
Yeah.
Commission as well. I know my committee with EDAC, we meet second Tuesday of every month. But I'm not familiar when Building and Standards meets regularly, Aaron. Arch.
We're the first Wednesday. First Wednesday.
Gage or Arch, I understand we're going to have the subcommittee to work on that on certain length on a little project. Do you know when that subcommittee is going to be meeting?
I don't.
I don't believe that that's been discussed.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to give you a Monday back here, Paul.
I like them. I'll take the Monday.
Okay. Okay. Then, so is that, do I have a motion? Since we need to follow those procedures. Frank,
I move that we meet regularly second and fourth Monday of each month at 6:30.
I'll second.
second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Mr. Tannehill, were you in favor of that?
Well, I'm no longer the president of the North Shore Republicans, so I'm not totally tied to their meetings, but and I don't know that they have anything actually set up yet as far as Mondays, but they had been meeting on Mondays, so I'm okay until they decide, and maybe I can help them decide a Monday that won't conflict.
There you go. Push them to the first and third Mondays.
Right.
Okay. All right. So you're in favor of getting back a Monday?
I'm okay.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Then it's unanimous. Okay. Did everybody have a chance to review the minutes? And does anybody have a motion to approve them? If you haven't had a chance to read them, we can table it till next time, but because they just came out today. Paul? You're muted, buddy.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Okay. Do I have a second? Well, let me first add, it's on the consent agenda, so if somebody wants to make some changes, they'd have to speak up and say so. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
2, 3, 4. You in favor, Mr. Tannehill?
yes.
Okay. They're approved unanimously. Consent agenda is approved unanimously. Okay. Next.
The only problem I had was they spelt my name incorrectly.
Okay. I will. I'll make that note, pass it on to the secretary. All right. For the next committee meeting, we'll go through. Let's try to go through 5 through 10. They should go a little faster. There were much fewer recommendations the further we went down into the guts of this thing. And I will also try to get you a red line of the essentially the proposed grammatical changes so that you can make sure that they're not substantive as well. Or ones that we all said, yeah, that makes sense on tonight. And so I'll have that for you in written form next time. So with a red line version so that we can do that. And I'll incorporate, Paul, the rest of yours into my general list of possible areas. Anything else y'all would want to like on the agenda? Frank?
I may be out of order, but in one, and this, you correct me if I'm out of order or not. This has to do with who can give us suggested changes or issues. And I thought Erin had some, and I have heard that she had some issues in which the ordinances and the charter had discrepancies. I think there are some between ethics and the charter, for instance. Yep. And I would hope, Ms. Chairman, that she could pass on to the committee her thoughts on her charter amendment ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I'd like the council liaison to if you could check with other council members and see if they have any proposed changes. And Erin, I'm gonna, since you're the only one here from the city, I'll consider you the city liaison as well. And if you hear something from any of the other staff or check with the other staff, I'd sure appreciate it. And if you just shoot me a note on it, we'll include it and discuss it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Roberts.
I'm sorry, I spoke. Mr. Robbins had his hand up first.
Yeah, you're pretty close. I happen to see yours first.
Would you just, when you are in receipt of those recommendations from both council and Ms. Silvera, will you please distribute those items to the rest of us so that
absolutely
we can study those before the meeting? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I did forward to you language from the Texas Constitution regarding the extension of terms past 2 years. I didn't include all your committee members, so feel free to share that with them as you see fit. And I'll use the document that I received tonight as the starting point for making comments regarding the inconsistencies between the charter and the ethics.
Okay.
And if there are any other instructions, let me know.
Okay. If I left you off that mail chain, I'm sorry. I'll add you next time. I still trying to get my mailing lists together so that I shoot everything to the right people. Frank.
Who's doing minutes?
Christina.
So she's going to get this off, I guess, off the video.
Off the recording. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
At least that's what she said. Okie dokie. If there's anything else, do I have open to a motion to adjourn? Nope. Paul, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Aye.
Okay. All
Good
right.
night.
Thank you, guys.
Good night, everyone.